Monsters of the Sands is the second wing in the Manaforge Omega raid. It is home to the Forgeweaver Araz, the Soul Hunters, and Fractillus. Very quickly going to describe how this guide is set up. The video is split into chapters for each boss. You can find them down below. The first chapter will describe the boss fight mechanics and each of the important abilities, and the second chapter will be role-specific duties. LFR and Normal are practically identical, but I will make a note on any differing areas. The Forgeweaver. This is a two-phase fight with a brief intermission when the boss reaches 100 energy. Phase 1 is keeping orbs away from collectors, the intermission is a DPS race, and Phase 2 is keeping orbs away from a black hole. LFR and Normal are pretty much the same with one minor difference in Phase 1, which I'll mention once we get there. Phase 1. The boss will begin by activating an arcane collector, which will send out a bunch of circles. These need to be avoided. These circles will radiate outwards each time a new collector is activated. The collectors are also shielded, so you can ignore attacking them for now. Astral Harvest is going to target several players, and once this debuff expires, purple orbs will appear where those players were located. These orbs will then start traveling towards the collector, and they need to be burned down ASAP. If they reach the collector, it will deal a big burst of raid damage. Players targeted with Arcane Harvest should position themselves on the opposite side of the boss, angled away from the collector so that the orbs spawned will travel through the boss and be easier to cleave down. They can also be CC'd, so use your abilities to just help keep them away. Silencing Tempest is going to target several players and track them over 3 seconds, so run away from the raid if you're targeted. If you're hit, it's going to deal damage and silence you. Arcane Obliteration is a soak mechanic that targets and tracks the tank, so make sure everyone is grouping up to help split up this damage. Here's the difference between LFR and Normal. On LFR, you just deal with the soak. However, on Normal, an Arcane Echo is spawned in this circle after the soak. This echo will activate any collectors, causing more circles that you need to avoid. Plus, he sends out his own attack that will track several players over 3 seconds, silencing them if hit. The raid will quickly want to burn this guy down and then get back onto the boss. Tanks, you're going to want to swap after the soak so that one tank is holding the echo and the other is holding the boss. Tanks also need to be aware of the boss's overwhelming power ability. This is a stacking 45-second dot. You should taunt after each soak, so the dot should only hit 2 stacks, just keep an eye on it. Phase 1's abilities. Arcane Collector. The boss spawns and activates a collector which sends out a bunch of circles from its location. Astral Harvest is a 4-second debuff on players that spawns an arcane manifestation orb when it expires. Astral Surge is the punishment for missing one of these orbs. It deals massive raid damage and applies a long dot. Arcane Obliteration is a large soak circle that's on the tank. The raid needs to stack in this to help split up the damage. Silencing Tempest. These are circles that track players for 3 seconds. They deal damage and silence them if hit. Overwhelming Power. This is the tank-related ability that applies a 45-second dot, and it stacks. The Intermission. Once the boss reaches 100 energy, the boss will use Arcane Expulsion, which will knock everyone backwards and trigger the intermission. The collectors will lose their shield and need to be destroyed before they reach 100 energy. The raid should avoid the middle of the arena as well, as touching the center will deal massive damage to you. The raid will also have to deal with adds that spawn, so tanks need to make sure to pick up these guys and get them grouped up near the collector for cleave damage. The adds will do more damage the longer they are on the same target, so if the damage gets high, tanks do need to swap off. Aside from that, just avoid the ground effects and the beams. Healers need to be aware that damage during the intermission ramps the longer that it lasts. Once all collectors are destroyed, the boss will return to the center of the room and channel a Mana Splinter ability. Once this finishes, the boss takes 100% increased damage for 12 seconds, so pop a lust here. Phase 1 will then repeat. Phase 2. After the second intermission, or when the boss reaches 25% HP, the boss will create a dark singularity in the back center of the room. This starts the DPS race as the black hole will constantly pull you towards it, and the pull gets stronger over time. Be aware that once he finishes this cast, it knocks everyone backwards, so stay away from his altar, otherwise you could get insta-killed by the black hole. The main mechanic here is just like Phase 1, but with a Void theme. The boss will cast Void Harvest on players, which drops Void orbs when it expires. The raid has to prevent these orbs from reaching the black hole. Tanks will still deal with the overwhelming power debuff, so swap it around 2 to 3 stacks, and the Silencing Tempest circles will also continue during this phase. This is also a primary to lust if you need that extra push. Role-specific duties. Tanks in Phase 1 swap after each Arcane Obliteration and stay still so players can soak. The tank with the Echo ad needs to make sure that they are grouped near the boss for that extra cleave damage. In the intermission, quickly pick up the shielded attendants and watch their stacking damage buff. In Phase 2, swap after 2 to 3 stacks of overwhelming power. Make sure you keep the boss near the entrance of the room. Healers in Phase 1 expect a burst of raid damage during the Arcane Obliteration soak, and expect constant pulsing raid damage while collectors are active. During the intermission, expect ramping raid damage the longer that this phase lasts. In Phase 3, expect increasing raid damage as the pull gets stronger. DPS. In Phase 1 and Phase 3, the primary responsibility is to stop the orbs from reaching their destination. Make sure to shift your priority to the Echo ad once it's active. During the intermission, make sure you're cleaving down the adds with the collectors. The Soul Hunters. This is a council-style fight with 3 bosses. The raid will want to defeat all 3 bosses at roughly the same time because when one dies, the others begin pulsing, increasing raid damage. Each boss has their own mechanics and will trigger an intermission when they reach 100 energy. For tanks, Adarus just does his own thing, so you're going to be swapping Ilyssa and Velaryn after their tank busters. Let's break down each boss's main abilities. Adarus. At the start of the fight, he will use Devour Azire, which spawns 2 soak circles on the ground. 2 ranged players should be designated for soaking this as they will have an extra responsibility. Soaking applies a debuff that makes the boss repeatedly attack them with a consume ability. Each hit deals damage and applies a healing absorb, so healers will need to constantly be healing them. The 2 soakers will be responsible for clearing the arena floor of the growing Oblivion pools. The boss creates these pools with his Void Step ability. Pop a defensive and stand in the pools to remove them, otherwise the entire floor gets consumed, which will basically wipe the raid. As a final note here for healers, this debuff is dispellable, but you shouldn't dispel it unless the person has no idea what they're doing. Dispelling will make the debuff jump to another player, but it also deals a big burst of raid damage. Velaryn. Velaryn's main ability is called the Hunt. This will target a random player shown by a wide line. The targeted player should make sure to run towards the edge of the circle to help lengthen this line. The reason is that the raid needs to stand in this beam to split up the damage. I-beam is her tank mechanic. This is a 4-second channel onto the tank and it knocks them backwards, so make sure you're facing this away from the raid. It also applies a stacking debuff, so taunts will want to swap after this attack. Blade Dance is her last ability, so just move out of all of the lines. Ilyssa. Ilyssa's main tank ability is called Fracture. This deals massive damage and spawns a green Soul Fragment. A DPS player or the other tank should quickly grab this fragment as the tank takes 35% less healing while this is active. Whoever picks it up will have a 30-second dot applied to them. Spirit Bomb will deal a burst of raid damage and apply a healing absorb. If any Soul Fragments are left when this is used, it will basically wipe the raid. The Intermission. When a boss reaches 100 energy, they will perform their own special ultimate ability. Adarus. Collapsing Star, he will summon a black hole that pulls everyone inside. Small stellar fragments will also be pulled in from the outer ring of the arena. Players must intercept these fragments to prevent them from hitting the center and exploding on the raid. Velaryn. Fell Rush. She will summon echoes of herself that charge across the entire room and at random players. Make sure you avoid the boss's lines, and if you have a line, try to stand still so that other players can avoid you. Ilyssa. Infernal Strike. She will leap around the room, creating large damage zones. When she lands, she will then cast a large frontal cone attack, so pay attention and quickly get out of her attack range. Role-specific duties. Tanks. One tank holds Ilyssa, and the other holds Velaryn. Adarus doesn't need to be tanked, so just make sure you're keeping the bosses as close together as possible. Swap after each Fracture and I-beam attack. Healers. Players with Devour Azire will constantly need extra healing, and do not dispel. Expect a burst of raid damage and a raid-wide healing absorb from Spirit Bomb. Expect quickly increasing raid damage once one boss dies until they are all 3 defeated. DPS. Make sure you collect the Soul Fragments after Fracture. Whoever soaks Devour Azire needs to shrink the Oblivion pools and use a defensive to help your healers. Make sure you're stacking up to soak the Hunt, and cleave down all 3 bosses evenly. Fractillus. This is a single-phase fight where the raid will be creating and destroying walls. There are 6 crystals with lines fanned out from the boss. The overall goal here is to not let that line reach the boss, otherwise it's a wipe. Players will get a debuff that creates a crystal wall, and each wall extends that line. If there are 6 walls in front of a crystal, the line reaches the boss, which basically means a wipe. Positioning is very important for this fight, and can turn this into a chaotic mess. Each crystal represents a lane. The raid needs to designate a safe lane. Pick whatever you want, but let's say lane 3. Everyone except the tanks will stack in this lane unless they get a debuff. One tank will position themselves in lane 1 and the other in lane 6. That leaves lanes 2, 4, and 5 open to handle mechanics. The fight itself. Crystalline Shockwave will mark a few players with a black orb above them. These players will create a wall when this attack goes off. Make sure you're spacing these out in designated zones. If one lane has 5 walls and one lane has 2, pick the lane with less walls. Shattering Backhand is going to mark a few players with a white arrow above them. These players will destroy walls when this attack goes off. Make sure you're choosing lanes that have the most walls. Couple final notes here. Players creating walls have a 12-second dot applied to them, and when walls are destroyed, they deal a burst of raid damage and send out a bunch of circles that also need to be avoided. Tanks are dealing with a Shockwave Slam ability that also creates walls behind them, and you'll want to swap after each use. Pop Lust on Pool, and that's pretty much it. Fractillus' abilities. Crystalline Shockwave. Players obtain a debuff with a dark orb above them. Right before this attack is launched, it locks players in place and knocks them backwards, creating a crystal wall. Shattering Backhand, players will obtain a debuff with a white arrow above them. Right before the attack is launched, it locks players in place and knocks them backwards, destroying a crystal wall. Shockwave Slam is the tank buster that applies a 500% damage increase debuff and creates one crystal wall behind the tank. Role-specific duties. Tanks. Position yourself on opposite ends of the boss for easier wall management. Swap after each Shockwave Slam. Healers. Expect constant raid damage as walls are created and destroyed. Black Orb creates a wall, White Arrow destroys a wall. DPS. Stay grouped up with everyone in the safe lane unless you get a debuff. Black Orb creates a wall and a White Arrow destroys a wall. Congratulations, you just cleared the second wing of the Manaforge Omega raid. Shout out to these channel members. If this video helped them, press the thumbs up. Subscribe if you enjoy WoW content. Become a channel member for 99 cents a month. That gives you early ad-free access to all my videos. Also check out my Prefessional merch. I'll see you in Wing 3.